that you really need to be concerned about. The first is, are we going to survive? Will we still have our doors open tomorrow? And this is the most fundamental question, right, of a bootstrap business, because you do have to have enough money to keep the lights on the next day. And then the second question is, boy, how long do we have to survive for until we're out of this survival mode? And what are some of the forces that will help us get out of survival mode? So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the survival days, because I think this is actually a pretty well documented subject. You can read any number of books on cash flow management, early days sales, marketing techniques to bootstrap a business. A lot of what's going on is you're reaching out to friends and family and the network that you already have and making hard sales to them. And so if I were to pick some of the cliche things that worked for us, it's like this list over here. But I actually don't think, I'm going to spend much time on these. But there is one survival tip that I think is worth spending a little bit of time on. And that's, this is actually pretty common knowledge too. Like everyone here, if you've ever thought about starting a business, or read some guides to what people suggest, you're always going to read, you want great co-founders. And what I found interesting in my experience is that the common knowledge is that by having co-founders, you get sort of a Venn diagram of capabilities, and that's true. You also get kind of like a dual core nature, like you've got twice the bandwidth to achieve work that you would if you were alone, or 3 times if it's 3 people. But what's really interesting and valuable about having co-founders is that over the long course of time, and you'll have to excuse my poor keynote drawings here, if you imagine the course of life having ups and downs over a long period of time, and when we're talking about a bootstrap startup, this is 4 or 5 years at least, there are ups and downs that happen across everyone's life. And you can imagine this is co-founder A's life, co-founder B's life. And what's cool about having multiple co-founders is you kind of average each other out. So you get somewhat of an even keel over time that really gives the company some stability. And even if we're not talking about life events like dealing with the ups of marriage or having kids, or the downs of someone passing away, even if you're just thinking about, can I take a vacation, it really helps to have other people on board who can keep the engine running while you're working on it. So that's all I'm going to say about survival. What I think is a more interesting and sort of less discussed topic is how long until is exploring the question of how long until we're booted up, how long until we're in a self-sustaining mode that allows us to not have to fight quite so hard for every single dollar that we're bringing in, for every single client that we're winning. And this is going to be, like I said, somewhat specific to a consultancy, but I think that's actually, as computer scientists coming out of Carolina, we're well suited for a consultancy because we're building tools and solutions for clients. So the key, I think, for understanding the key question behind how long until we're booted is what kind of momentum, what forces are there that we can ride beyond just the sort of grind that's going on to keep us in business day to day? What are the forces that start to build up, or that we can be investing in over time, that will allow us to be self-sustaining, that will take the business from something that you're working hard, you're pedaling, or in a swimming analogy, you're swimming really hard trying to catch that wave, and then eventually you stand up and there's some forces behind you that are helping driving the business forward without having to invest so much energy. And there are a wide number of forces that can help with this. The one that's worked really well for us that I want to talk about is word of mouth marketing and growing by referrals. And I feel like I would be doing myself a disservice to give a talk in Sitterson without doing a little bit of hand-wavy math. So I'm going to try and develop a very basic model for how you might think about how long it takes for a business to exist and sort of be self-sustaining on word-of-mouth marketing. So over the course of our lifetime, we've kind of had this average of 100 new projects or clients a year. So if we can imagine in the early days, in the first year, we're grinding, and every quarter we're bringing in 24 new clients just by sweat and hard work, Clay working his magic, reaching out to customers. Joel and I furiously typing on the keyboard, trying to create the tools. And over time, we're developing a body of work and a body of clients. And so the key question we want to answer is, when do we have enough referrals that we're not having to grind it out for all of these? How many will it take to reach a critical mass before referrals become a source of business that are self-sustaining? So to borrow a concept from viral marketing, in viral marketing you have something called the Referral Coefficient, which if any of you have ever studied that, you'll be familiar with. But the basic idea is we combine two rates to create a coefficient that represents one, for every number of clients that we bring in, how many referrals are they sending our way? This is the referral rate. And then two, for every number of referrals that we get, how many of those actually become clients? So we can just throw in some numbers here to make this a simple example. We could say for every 3 clients that we create a tool for, they refer 1 new client to us that also needs a tool. And this is a sort of an organic level of referrals. If you were thinking about viral marketing in the VC sense, you would have multiple referrals per client. But one of the interesting things about bootstrapping and growing organically is that it is a slower, harder to measure process. And then let's say for every 2 referrals, we win 1 new client. So we can see over time, referrals start to really give us some organic growth. But there is a problem with this. And does anyone spot what that problem is right off the bat? For the sake of keeping on time, I'm just going to push through it, because Gary already threatened I would be slapped if I go over. But the problem with this is that we're assuming that every 3 months we're getting a complete referral cycle of existing clients sending new business our way. And that's just, that would be awesome if it were the case that every three months we were getting 1 new client from every 6 existing, but it's not very realistic. So what we can do is we can add in the concept of a referral period. And if we wanted to, this is still probably an optimistic view, but I think for demonstration purposes, if we think that every 9 months we're going through one of these referral periods where clients are sending new business our way, we can start to iterate on our model to show that it actually is taking quite a bit longer before we reach the point of self-sustainability. And so it's not until 3.5 years that we're running sort of on our own. And then the last piece that I want to talk about in this model is, does happiness matter when you're trying to build a word-of-mouth business? And absolutely it does. In some ways, happiness plays into that referral coefficient, but largely, if you're thinking about dissatisfied customers, at best, they're just subtracting from your total body of customers. At worst, they're actually impacting it by more than that. So you really have to care a lot about the happiness of your clients and doing right by them. So just because I want to have a little bit of time for questions, I'm going to move quickly through this. But at New Media Campaigns, we've kind of found that we don't worry so much about these 2 numbers over here. Largely, in a services-based business like ours, they're sort of natural constants that exist in our industry. It's in the way to think about this is maybe to think about an architect, right? Like, if you're working with an architect who's designed a new home for you and you're really happy with it, boy, you'd love to tell your friends about them, but it's not very often that your friends are in need of an architect service. It just comes up sort of naturally through the course of one's lifetime or over time. But what you do have a lot of control over is the number of projects that you're trying to take on. So in our case, we've made a point, and it's served us well in terms of becoming a company that's this growth is driven by word of mouth marketing, by continuing to do 100 projects every year, and by minimizing the number of unhappy clients and really caring a lot about how we're serving them, and making sure that we're going above and beyond for the folks that we work with. And so, just to quickly sum up what we've talked about, when we're talking about bootstrapping, there are sort of 3 key concerns that you're worried about. The first is, there's sort of 3 key takeaways that I want to impress upon you. The first is you really want great co-founders. The reason for this is sort of the second thing I wanted to impress upon you is that it's kind of a slog in the early days, and you want the war buddies. Like the reason you are able to get through that slog period is because you've got co-founders who you're sharing experiences with, and you're pushing each other through. It's almost like having a workout partner. Like you're really building off each other and pushing each other through. And then the last piece is, you could look at this somewhat pessimistically and think, well, boy, if it's going to take 3 to 5 years before this starts getting a little bit easier, that sounds awful. But the entrepreneur, is optimistic, perhaps to a fault. And I think the key takeaway I'd like to impress is you just have to stick with it. And as long as you're continuing to do the work and continuing to make clients happy, eventually you'll get there. And that's what organic growth is kind of all about. It's kind of like, when you're a kid and you're standing in the doorway and marking with a pencil how tall you are, you're doing that because you don't have a good sense of day to day whether or not you're growing a little bit, or you just don't feel that. Organic growth is slow. But as long as you stick with it, and as long as you stay alive and you check in every so often, you'll see that you've really made some progress and you're growing quite a bit. And so, yeah, that's kind of bootstrapping. Just turn it over to you guys for any questions.
All right, questions?
I guess I had one question about bootstrapping in the computer sense. You sometimes go through different technologies or different kinds of languages, different kinds of tools to get the system back up to its running state where the OS is fully running. Were there certain different changes of technologies, methods, tools you used until you got to sort of a sustaining state?
So I'm going to repeat the question, which I'm going to summarize as what different technologies and tools did you see a change in technologies and tools as you got to the sustainable state? Sure.
So on that survival slide, one of the bullets that I had on there was avoid traps. And one of the things that I think we were very protective of, Joel and I, was avoiding the trap of going outside of our technology stack level of comfort. Because once you start to do that, you're having to learn new things, you're slowing down, you're potentially taking on projects that you don't know necessarily what all is involved in coming through on those. One answer to that is we actually tried to avoid changing technology stacks pretty vigorously so that we could keep moving forward at a pace that we knew was sustainable. But the other is, over time, certainly as you're building tools and working with these platforms, you do have to stay on the cutting edge, and you do have to be as you grow in size of complexity to the clients you serve. So even though we work with 100 clients every year, the projects have gotten much bigger and bigger and more complex. We have had to expand what the platforms we're working with and are able to serve.
So talking to new clients is very time consuming. It seems like you could easily spend almost all of the time talking to potential new clients and then not have any time to work. So for a small group, how do you manage that?
How do you manage talking to new clients? Where does that time come from? It's very time consuming.
Yep. So this is actually a question that would probably be better answered by my co-founder, Clay. We found that what worked really well for us was having a tech side and a non-tech side. And so Joel and I were really focused on the tech, and Clay was really focused on the client relationships. And that's one of the places where having co-founders is really important. And so that split allowed a pretty clean separation of Clay's focus could be managing the accounts and keeping the sales pipeline flowing, while we could be managing the pipeline of ensuring that projects were meeting deadlines and that we were turning out projects on time.
I think you mentioned that you had, how many people, 16 or was it
14.
14, yeah. Out of 14, how many just do client relationships?
4, 5?
4.5.
4.5, yeah. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, what percentage of your code base is reusable?
What percentage of the code base is reusable? We're just swapping in the next speaker here. Go ahead.
Yeah, just let me know when we're out of time, Gary.
Yeah, you're fine.
So it depends on the project. We do a wide variety of work. And sort of our run-of-the-mill stuff, we get to reuse almost all of the code base, and we're just kind of reskinning some of the product on top of it. But for some of the bigger projects, like the dining services one, where you've got custom data, like that nutritional data, is something we've never worked with before. You are developing new code for that. Yep.
When you reach your sustainability stage, did you ever think about course ranking your clients as to profitability, time they spend, extra work that they should do, or be not compensated for it, and fire them?
Okay, the question is about ranking your clients and deciding who we're making money off of and maybe taking some and not so much the others.
Yep. So that is something we've thought a lot about and had to deal with over time. And at the end of the day, we've started doing a better job of tracking costs of clients, and we've got a better sense of when we're running into danger areas. But we actually have taken a strategy of trying to eat some of those costs as much as we can to certain limits, right? I think a hostile client is something that is a different problem entirely. But when you're close to running over, you're running over. We like to eat those costs largely because of what I was talking about with this word of mouth referral-based force. And a happy client is actually worth more to you than the couple of extra or the extra set of money that you're getting later. But certainly, as we've grown, there have been times where you kind of do need to fire a client when it's become it's not necessarily a pleasant process, but it winds up, I think, being best for both sides. Cool.
Other questions? One more.
About the time leading up to month 0.
Yep.
The decision to kick off. Were you driven more by entrepreneurial spirit or the idea that you had a better mousetrap that needed to come out?
So that's an interesting question.
Why don't you repeat the question?
Okay, sure. So the question is, before we decided to kick off this venture, did we just want to be entrepreneurs, or did we think we had a better mousetrap? And the truthful answer to that is a little bit of both. Our initial vision for the company was actually to be specifically tool and platform provider for political campaigns. That's where the name kind of originates from. And we actually won the Carolina Challenge business plan competition based on the idea that we would be creating a reusable platform for political campaigns. But we kind of quickly realized that, hey, you know, we actually like building tools for people and for a wide variety of people. And we slowly tacked towards becoming more of a digital services agency than necessarily a product company. But so it was a little bit of both. We did think we had a better mousetrap. We turned out to be wrong in some ways, but you know, right where it mattered, in that we could still build mousetraps. Cool.
All right, let's thank Rick.